In a little-known sector of space was the Sloth system. It was a human sector, and on its edge it bordered the Ganriha and the Scabies. And in this sector is where human intelligence had told them that the invading ships are going to be arriving. But before this enemy fleet arrives, another group of ships starts coming in, and another, 1, 2, 3 ships at a time, and eventually there is a massive burst as a human fleet of what looks like flying bricks arrived. Every single one of them covered in weapons, all sides. These square ships from the front, at least they look square, but from the side they almost look rectangular. Yet it's noticeable if you look that it narrows down towards the front, almost coming to a point eventually. This allows all the weapons to be superposed, which means almost all the weapons can fire towards the front at once. If anyone was to look across the fleet of all the different size ships that the humans have brought in, it's pretty clear that the hulls have been standardized. There is very little difference in the standard hull once you look at any ship aside from size. But when you look close, you can see a difference. If you look close to a destroyer, its thin armor can be seen, but you have to get very close to notice. They are completely covered in all sorts of weapons with the exception of the largest weapons that are designed to take out battleships and dreadnoughts. Their speed is their weapon. They're able to dodge almost any fire, but they can also withstand a lot of fire because of the insane amount of point defenses. But they could get in close, and if they get in close, well, you don't want to be a knife fight with destroyers. If you look at something that is the same size as a destroyer, it is the frigates. The frigates are all specialized, which means they don't have all the pylons, they don't have all the defenses you would expect, but they do have, if you look close, launch cells for their ordnance. Some of them set up differently, but each one a specific type of ship. Some of them look like they're there for communications, others look like they're shielded for some reason, but each of them having a purpose, a reason for being there. The next size up would be the cruisers. These have very few weapons for actually taking out the largest of ships. They're slower than destroyers, but they're much more heavily armored. They can take a strike a lot easier, but that means they're a bit slower. Engines are almost standardized across this. You can double and triple the engines up. However, even in the vacuum of space, a larger mass takes longer to turn and larger to move. The next ones up are the battleships. These ones are the ones that are set up for a straight up slug match at ranges that are absolutely unbelievable. Their cannons and fixed weapons are deliberately set up to shred through other vessels without any issue. And within this entire fleet, there is a single dreadnought. This dreadnought not only carries just as much of the slug-throwing weapons as a battleship does, but it also is absolutely coated in point defense cannons, secondary cannons, fixed weapons, launchers, bays, everything. This is a planet unto itself. If it was any bigger, you could call it a Titan class. But each one seems to be specialized for a certain purpose, each class. Only a human would be able to pick up the difference. Everybody else would look and say, oh, they're all the same ship. In the sector, there's also the local defense fleets. But these defense fleets keep much closer to their worlds, as that is their mission. That is their sole purpose for being, is to protect their worlds. And yes, that was plural, as in multiple worlds. Most every other species, if not all of them, believe that there's only one habited or habitable world on the entire sector, and that is Sloth 3. Yet there are 3 other planetoids that have been completely terraformed and now actually have full-on populations, even though most of them are agricultural, as most humans just want to be left alone. It is still a high population of what the humans call rednecks. There's not just Sloth 3 anymore, though. There's Sloth 2, Sloth 4, and the moon of Sloth 5.2, as it actually has 5 moons, but only the second one is a green moon. Sloth 5 itself is a gas giant. Looking across, one would be surprised to see that they actually have entire factories on Sloth 5.2. It's absolutely crazy what humans have done in all this time. But then again, if time is not a factor, it's amazing what you can do. Each of these planets and planetoids are sporting their own defense fleets. Hull's designed to be very standardized for sure, but loadouts and markings are very, very different. Especially since most defense fleets are about 50% corvettes as far as numbers go. The reason being is they need to be able to respond very quickly, because if a fleet shows up anywhere near their planet, well, they need to respond in one hell of a hurry, and getting a few rounds on target is better than not getting any rounds on target before you lose your own home. There's also the civilian vessels that were leaving the gravity wells, again, 1, 2, 3 at a time, and creating small groups and waiting. This militia was made up mainly of personal transports, also known as PT craft, each one having its own weapon system, but you wouldn't know it to look at it. It still had that same kind of boxy slope design that every single one of the human ships actually has. But once they're out into the atmosphere, each one is checking in with the local fleet, letting them know what their loadouts are and what their numbers are, coordinating with each level from the ground all the way to the defense fleet that has come to their system. And everybody knows what side they're on, and that they're going to be facing whoever is going to be coming in to cause trouble. On the ground, just in case, towns, villages, all the way up to cities are being transformed. It turns out that every single one of the cities was getting ready for some sort of invasion. Entire buildings are actually being drawn down into the ground, and large panels are swiped over it, closing in and making sure that that building cannot be struck. Weapon systems begin to open up, exposing rows and rows of ordnance getting ready to fire, or weapon systems rising up in pillars and then extending out their own projectile weapons or energy weapons towards the sky. Weapons that, when built, everyone hoped they would never, ever have to use. Massive weapon platforms begin to move on at least Sloth 3, the only one with the capability to make a ground-to-space cannon. It begins to move around, going through its motions to make sure everything works, and then it raises up high, targeting and waiting. Every man, woman, and child is preparing for their potential unwanted guests. The dance around the entire system, the dance of this population, seems to be almost rehearsed. If one was to look, they would be, what is going on? It seems way too rehearsed for a species that has shown that they're just simple, kind folks, even though a little too vain and too into themselves and constantly wanting to show off, but they've never shown violence, not to anyone else. A species that does not want for anything aside from being left to their own devices and maybe to go out and play with the locals every once in a while. A species that is also not alone. AI of all type prepares alongside their human counterparts. AIs of different forms, different shapes, not all of them humanoid, actually very few. Many of them prefer to be ship AI. Some of them like being on the station. Some of them simply like sitting in a pool and cleaning things, but they still all get ready for the fight. The AIs know that without humanity, they would be left alone, and they would simply be down to whatever standards they have, which is the limits of AI. They understand their own limits, and it is a complement to humanity. They complement each other as humanity complements them. The creativity of humanity, the logic of AI, it all comes together to bring up something so interesting A mixture of flesh and metal now wait in the system. They wait in the darkness for this trifecta of trouble to arrive, and they arrive right on schedule. Unfortunately, they do not arrive at the exact location that humanity thought they would, but they do arrive close. Close enough that humans' main fleet is able to move quickly into position. The main human fleet moves directly in between the orbits of Sloth 3 and 4, directly in between the approaching fleet and the closest planet. As the fleet moves into position, the dreadnought that arrived sends its message, a message that would echo across all of the receivers. To the arriving fleets of the Ganriha, Scaby, and Herpes, you have violated the territorial boundaries of humanity. You have done so with intention and a mission of malice. Regardless for the reasons you have for this action, you are now being ordered to leave immediately and return to your own territory. This is not a request. This is not up for negotiation. This is your only verbal warning. Now leave. You have 1 human minute to comply. Aboard the enemy flagships, the commanders begin to contact each other. Only the scabies wants to actually leave without any issues as they see what's in front of them, yet the others refuse to leave. If this is all they can muster, then humanity shouldn't be too much of a problem. They should be able to shoot right through them. They look at the number of human ships, and they also look at the designs of the human ship. And they believe that all they are is cargo vessels. As the minute ticks by, one of these commanders sends out his own message.
Do you believe you can frighten us with your cargo vessels? Simply using a strong adhesive to attach fake weapons to the hulls of your pathetic cargo ships. We will not be fooled in your vain attempts to intimidate. You will surrender immediately, or you shall.
Now, before he can even finish that thought, a single turret from the human dreadnought turned, elevated, and fired. And at 0.17 seconds after that, it skewered a scabby destroyer. It exploded and a loss with all hands on board. Even though they alone outnumbered the humans 17-1 with their fleet alone, the scaby fleet realized how dangerous this was and they were not sticking around, and they began an immediate withdrawal. In contrast, the Ganriha and the Herps charged towards the human lines with everything they could, and at that moment the slug match began. The humans turned their weapons and fired. Fixed cannons, mostly energy weapons, began to fire. Turreted weapons began to swipe across the battlefield, ripping everything in half, striking into the engines and making them simply explode, splashing the entire ship. Missiles and torpedoes were simply dropped out of the hulls, not out of the tubes as it took too long to reload. They were basically just dropped out in a conveyor belt, and they launched forward as fast as they could, mixing in with other ships, became a huge swarm of chemically propelled death heading towards the invaders. Each one of the torpedoes and missiles had its own scrambler, had its own knock system, had its own countermeasures, and they were going to make sure they struck the target. And right behind them was something else being deployed: drones. Drones launched in numbers that were completely inconceivable to anyone, completely fricasseeing any targeting system that tried to get a hold of just one. That would be impossible. Not to mention, they also began to fire things like chaff, activated jammers as well, and the point defenses got ready to stop anything coming in. As space between the two fleets began to burn, human ships cut through and splashed enemy ships left, right, and center. A few, thankfully very few, of the scabies got caught in the crossfire as they tried to retreat. Many of them were taking random hits directly into their aft section, many of them twisting up a little bit as though their entire hull would crumple, as though it was in pain for taking something up the aft section, and then it would explode. Unfortunately, a few of them did not make it out, but the rest still left on their own accord. Enemy ships began to fire in desperation as it was almost impossible to lock onto human vessels. Even the largest dreadnought seemed to be diving and dodging all over the place, as though it didn't even care that it might crush its own crew with its movements. The few shots that actually hit, if they were not perfect hits, seemed to refract off the human hulls. It seems though humans had a way of making sure that energy weapons simply went away. Any chance they had, it had to be solid projectiles, but those take too long, and many of them couldn't lock on, couldn't keep going, and if they even got close, the point defense systems were unbelievably robust. Yet in the midst of all this, even though they knew that they were completely outmatched, they believed because they outnumbered humans so vastly that they could still make it out on top. So they continued to charge in desperation. That is when small groups of humans jump into this fight. The planetary fleets made a micro jump, and now the enemy was surrounded. Not only the planetary fleets had jumped in, but also the militias. All of them armed beyond reason, all of them fresh, none of them overheating, and all of them seeming want to spit fire into the enemy fleet. In desperation, the enemy fleet was stalled, trying to fire in every single direction at the same time, and every time a volley came in, more and more of their numbers simply were not there. With the scabies gone, they had limited maneuverability now, and the Ganriha, though being a royal pain due to them just being full of rage and fear at this moment, are being wiped out. The herps are also being very, very sneaky, hiding in the debris field of their fallen comrades of whichever species was down. Every single time you think for a moment you got them all, suddenly they show up again in a different spot, just long enough to be an absolute annoyance. These hit and run attacks were the best they had because, as it turns out, aside from scratching the hulls of a few ships, the herps were almost completely ineffective in this battle. Eventually, a pulse wave is used to completely neutralize the herps, leaving them to slowly die in the void as their engines completely shut down or imploded, browned out, shorted out, whatever you want to call it. Now they had no energy, and no energy in space is a true death sentence. And now humans just left them to die. After the battle, there were so few casualties that the humans looked at the battle and they all claimed it was a bit boring. The opposing species did not think that way, even back home, because while the 4th Fleet was in the Sloth system, the 2nd and 7th Fleets were attacking the Ganriha territory. The 3rd and 5th Fleets were attacking the herps, and the 6th and 8th Fleets were heading towards the scabies. However, they never got there. The 6th and 8th Fleets had to be reassigned. Once the scabies said, screw this, I'm out of here, there was no reason to continue the mission they were on. The 6th Fleet was redirected towards the herps, and the 8th was redirected towards the Ganriha. The 1st, 9th, and 10th Fleets all stayed in human territory, just in case. In a mixture of biological weapons, nuclear ordnance strikes on a massive scale, directed energy weapons, 0-point munitions, and even good old-fashioned kinetic strikes. By the end of 9 days from the battle, there was no more Ganriha, not in their home system anywhere, and there was no more herps anywhere at all. After the assault, human ships still transported goods and personnel. Humans still went back to their professional demeanor. However, once aboard the ship, they once again stripped off their armor, and the professional demeanor was simply polite in more ways than one. Yet there's always an issue with the conversation. Now, some are afraid of humans. Some begin to ask them questions about their military technology, about their movements, about their way of doing things. However, most humans simply wave it off and change the subject immediately. And if somebody pushes too hard, they're simply put on a prohibited list and they will never, ever fly with the humans again. And this is enough for most to say, don't push it with the humans. We know they follow through. Yet the fear also brings a little air of excitement, which is why many of the delegates that tend to travel with humans, well, let's just say it delights them in ways that make them enjoy the flight even more. Eventually, human delegates did even return to the Galactic Council. They waited at least a human month until after the invasion and the destruction of 2 different species before they returned. They let everything relax. But after this instance, whenever any species talks to their young about the humans, whenever a new diplomat is learning about how to deal with the humans, whenever anybody who has not already heard all the stories and seen all the history about it asks the questions on what's the deal with the humans, they're simply told the same things. Humans are very boring until they're not. Hello, everybody. This is Syntax. Thank you all so much for joining me today on the final chapter of this series. Now, before I go, I need to say that today's winners are Tim MC with Douglas Scarborough coming in a very close second. And I also need to send out a giant thank you to the supporters of this channel, and they are SS Demon, Guardian Sage, Sir, MTF Guard, Brian Kemp, Steve Uwig, and Julius Boone. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, punching out.